in one part of an ancient dialogue called Meno, Plato is concerned with the idea of where does your knowledge come from? Where is it obtained? And in this particular dialogue, what Plato decided to do was call upon his old friend Socrates, and in the form of a conversation with a slave boy, try to work through this idea of how knowledge is housed. And I wasn't there, and I don't speak a lot of Greek, but I think the conversation went something like this: "Hey, you slave boy, me? Do you know anything about formal mathematics?" "Me? No, I'm just a slave boy." "You'll do." And then Socrates decided to ask questions, trying to pull out successfully from this slave boy the fact that he was able to prove pretty rigorous formula about the area of a square. It didn't seem like much. But when it was all done, Socrates turns to Meno and says, "Aha! I told you so." He had it in him all along. All he needed was to have this knowledge reawakened. That it was in his soul. This is what Plato called it all along. It was in his soul all along. Well, that's pretty deep stuff. That somehow all the knowledge that we're going to be able to obtain is right there, and all we need to have is the questions asked for us. So I'd like to tell a couple of stories having to do with my background with the same sort of a concept. Is there something that's in you that needs to be reawakened? Well, when I was in 5th grade, Sister Vincentia had a task for us, and that task had to do with finding as many ways that you could represent the number 100. I'll say it was 100, I'm not quite sure now. And what you would do is find a way like, oh, 20 times 1 times 5, fantastic. And what you would do is you would write it on a strip of paper. And then you'd find another way. Oh, 97 plus 3, wonderful. You put that on a strip of paper, and you'd form a chain, like a chain that you would put on a Christmas tree, let's say. And we're supposed to take these links and form them together. I did this for a little while, but my brain, being what my brain is, decided, I don't know, Sister V. So instead of forming a link as such, I gave it a half of a twist. Now, what I was doing at the time, I thought was just having a little bit more fun with something that was a 5th grade math task. What I didn't know I was doing was making something called a Mobius strip. Now, I don't know about your experience with Mobius strips. And I didn't have any at the time either. All I knew was the other stuff was boring. So what I'd like to do for a minute here is literally and then figuratively poke a hole in something that Plato was saying. Because you may or may not have any of this knowledge inside of you. I'm not really sure. But one interesting thing about a Mobius strip is that if you cut it all the way around, get there, wait for it, wait for it. Interestingly, though cut all the way through, it remains in one piece. There's a lot more to know about a Mobius strip. But unlike this lucky slave boy, I'm not going to ask you too many questions about it. I'm going to say to you, go do a little bit of exploring. Okay? Consider what might happen if you twisted it twice, then put the ends together. Consider what would happen if you didn't cut it down the middle. I'll leave that for you. So, as I got a little bit older and started forgetting about Mobius strips, because again, I didn't know what they were. Started reading a little bit in the recreational mathematics section of the library. Found out a bit more about Mobius strips. Oh, trust me, I have many more nerd stories. And found some art by Escher that incorporated Mobius strips. But I kind of put them aside because, again, there were other nerdy things to do. Dungeons and Dragons was calling me at the time. But there was a second experience going on with my high school days. One thing I guess I should preface this part of the conversation by saying is, when I was bored, I liked to doodle. Probably the same way, but I had a go-to doodle. a little something like this. Now, as I work through this doodle, you might be saying one of two things. What's the big deal? Or as it unravels, you might be finding something aesthetically pleasing. Now, I know I did. Well, I couldn't stop. I mean, so what I found was that it was like falling down the rabbit hole with Alice. Right? That's awesome. And my mind sort of went that way. Now, come to find out later, in college, I was handed an issue of College Mathematics magazine. On the cover of College Mathematics magazine was my doodle. Like, you gotta be kidding me. So I've been doing something that other mathematicians found relevant, perhaps exciting, a little mathematically sexy. But I had no idea what it was about. So I looked at the article, but I got to talking with professors and trying to learn a little bit more about things in general. You know, it helped me kind of come out of my sole mathematical mind and into talking with some real mathematicians about stuff going on. But here's what I found out. That doodle is actually a very simple function. It's called an Archimedean spiral. I urge you to go take a look at what this might mean. But let me show you basically what the concept is. If you were to connect the dots in a very small incremental pattern, this function will form what you might call a spiral. If, however, you decide not to connect the dots in a very close pattern, voila. Again, I say, awesome. But I could understand it a little bit more. So with that behind me, I guess I got to thinking a little bit more about what Plato was saying. Well, where is this really housed? You know? I guess it was in me, but I'm not wholly sold on the fact that whatever knowledge you're going to be obtaining is just sitting in there. Because the questions just might not be asked. And I think one of the roles that we have, and I'm learning that as I teach a little bit more, is that you've got to have the conversations. You know, what you need is to be exposed to a lot of ideas so you can harness what's in there, get it out a little bit more, because the questions aren't really going to always be asked. And yet, with that said, I'm still tied to the idea that we've each got something sitting in there and we don't know what it is. Okay, and we're waiting for that beauty, and we know when something's beautiful. And I think what we need to do is take those two worlds and not try to say, okay, it's one or the other. And I guess if you're going to quote Forrest Gump, you'd say, I think maybe it's both.